So back to the story about those hearings into radical Islam in America. They begin tomorrow in Washington. Congressman Peter King, the head of the Homeland Security Committee in the House, will lead those hearings. The boxing Republican is taking some hits himself, it seems. Critics say he's singling out Muslims and putting Islam on trial. CNN senior congressional correspondent Dana Bash talked to King about all of that.
This is the chairman's seat. This is chairman's gavel.
Yep, it's the whole bit right here. This is where it's going to be.
Homeland Security Chairman Peter King preparing for his hearing on what he calls radicalization of Muslims in America, to some akin to Joseph McCarthy's 1950s communist witch hunt.
That Peter King is the modern-day Joseph McCarthy.
I would say, first of all, there's no basis for it, and secondly, I tell people to wait and watch and listen to the hearing.
King has not always been at odds with Muslim Americans. In the 1990s, he backed U.S. action in the Balkans to defend Muslims there.
That was not popular in my district, but I did it because it was the right thing to do. I thought the Muslim community in those countries was being victimized.
He had a close bond with leaders of this mosque and others in his New York district. Then came 9/11.
It switched when I saw the Muslim American community not responding the way they should have, when they were trying to cover up for al-Qaeda, when they were trying to blame it on Jews and the FBI and the CIA. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Like comments from now former friends like Razi Khan.
I said we should also investigate the possibility of Israel being involved. And that changed his opinion 100%.
You've been called a man obsessed with a Muslim radicalization.
Mm-hmm.
Are you obsessed?
No, I am very focused. I lost so many people in my district on September 11th, and within a 30-mile radius of my home, probably 1,000 people, over 1,000 people were murdered on September 11th.
His office is filled with reminders of the attack.
Funeral after funeral after funeral, and that one sort of, I don't know, to me it captured it all. If you ask me what I think of about going to work every day, it's 9/11 and preventing another 9/11.
King says that requires cooperation from U.S. Muslim leaders, which he insists law enforcement is not getting. But some call King's efforts against American Muslim terrorism now hypocritical. King is Irish American. In the 1980s, he was an active supporter of Gerry Adams and an Irish group the State Department then deemed terrorists, the Irish Republican Army.
The IRA was responsible for hundreds of civilian deaths in effectively what are terrorist attacks.
During the 1980s, I knew what Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were attempting to do within the IRA, and I was saying that continually, that there is a real opening here if the United States would take advantage of it to be an honest broker. Bill Clinton did that.
He insists the IRA was a legitimate force that had to be dealt with to achieve peace. Back in his committee room, King says he knows his hearing on radicalization of U.S. Muslims is stirring anger against him, accusations of bigotry, but has no apologies.
Hey, listen, I would love to be loved. I'm not a masochist, but on the other hand, I have a job to do, and I would not want to wake up the day after an attack and say I should have done something differently.
And Dana Bash is joining me from Capitol Hill. Hey there, Dana. Great piece, by the way. Amazing to learn more about the man behind these hearings. You say Congressman King, I mean, and he says it himself, believes that the Muslim community is not cooperating with law enforcement. So why didn't he invite anyone from the law enforcement community to testify?
It is such a good question. It's certainly one that I asked Congressman King, because he says that because of his connections with local law enforcement, particularly in New York, which he calls the epicenter of all this, he hears all the time that there's a lack of cooperation. But he is not inviting the FBI director, the attorney general, or anybody from local law enforcement. His answer effectively was that he doesn't necessarily think that they are going to say what he hears privately. He's not that they're not going to say that publicly they'll say that they are getting cooperation, which we should note for the record does actually jibe with some academic studies which say the same thing. But there will be one sheriff there from Los Angeles, and that sheriff, Kate, was invited by the Democrats in the committee. The witnesses that he invited are what he calls average Muslims, but they are two family members of Muslims in America who were radicalized, and also another doctor from Arizona who agrees with him.
Amazing how much this hearing, which, you know, as we know, hearings don't often create, there are so many hearings at Capitol Hill, they don't often create this much conversation, but definitely one to watch. Thanks, Dana. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. And now to Capitol Hill and the scheduled hearing that is stirring controversy before it even begins. Congressman Peter King's committee plans to look into the radicalization of American Muslims, and critics say it amounts to a witch hunt. We're going to talk to the congressman in just a moment, but first, NBC's Capitol Hill correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has the details. Good morning to you, Kelly.
Good morning, Meredith. Anticipation has been building, and emotions, too. You've got claims of religious and racial discrimination versus claims of too much political correctness, all in the fight to stop terror attacks. In New York City, protests.
We're sending a very strong signal that an entire faith community cannot be, held responsible for the actions of a few.
And counter-protests, exposing a very raw nerve.
I'm supporting the right of every American citizen to know who are in the midst, who are living amongst us, who are plotting to take down a current form of government.
At issue, the American Muslim community and terrorism.
Homegrown radicalization is a growing threat.
One powerful New York Republican is provoking an emotional fight. Peter King, chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee.
These hearings are absolutely essential. I am facing reality. My critics are not. They want to get tied up in some world of political correctness.
King will run a House hearing to examine to what extent some American Muslims can be radicalized to strike inside the U.S.
It's a small percentage, but that's where it's coming from. Al-Qaeda has changed its tactics.
King relies on the Obama administration's own assessment. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano.
We are also seeing an increased emphasis on recruiting Americans and Westerners to carry out attacks.
Key examples, according to the government, the American Muslims accused in the Fort Hood massacre and Times Square attempted car bombing. But many Muslim Americans are outraged and fear a high-profile hearing will lead to anger and discrimination.
Our community is bracing against generalization and fear-mongering because our community has suffered. It is very sad that we have not learned lessons from history.
Civil liberties groups sent King a letter comparing the hearing to 1950s-style McCarthyism aimed at communists and internment camps for Japanese Americans during World War II. A top White House official says while radical recruitment of Americans is up, U.S. Muslims help foil threats.
Muslim Americans are not part of the problem. You're part of the solution.
And that touches on one of the more controversial claims. Congressman King says some American Muslims are encouraged not to cooperate with authorities. There are about 7 million Muslims living in America, and they will be represented at this hearing, too, including one member of Congress who's Muslim who will testify. Meredith?
Kelly O'Donnell, thank you very much. New York Republican Congressman Peter King is chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Good morning to you, Mr. Congressman.
Good morning, Meredith.
Let me ask you, starting out, the hearing hasn't even started yet, and already you are being compared to Joe McCarthy, hell-bent on a witch hunt. What is your mission?
My mission, quite frankly, and really quite simply, is to show the extent of radicalization within the Muslim American community being carried out by Al-Qaeda. This is the same message the President's Deputy National Security Advisor gave the other night when he said Al-Qaeda has changed its strategy and it is now attempting to recruit and radicalize the Muslim American community. That's where the threat is coming from. Now, I have said over and over again, the overwhelming majority of Muslim Americans are outstanding Americans. But Al-Qaeda is recruiting in there, and they've had results. We saw Zazi, the attempted subway bomber in New York. We saw Shahzad, the Times Square bomb. We saw Major Hassan at Fort Hood. The Attorney General has said that he stays awake at night. He can't sleep at night being so concerned about the radicalization going on in this country. You had the clip there from Secretary Napolitano. So I'm carrying this to its logical conclusion of having a public hearing. And the hysteria and all this yelling and screaming that's going on, that's been caused by my opponents. I put out very basic, direct statements on this, saying what the purpose of the hearing is. I would hope they would have embraced the hearing. The leaders such as CAIR.
But I think the problem is a lot of people are not embracing the hearing. There are a lot of Muslim Americans who are concerned about it. They're going to feel alienated because of it. They're fearful of it. They're fearful of Islamophobia, more Islamophobia in this country. How do you avoid that, or do you care if that's a byproduct?
Well, I will run a good hearing. I will run an honest and fair hearing. Again, the hysteria that's been created is by my opponents, groups such as CARE, radical Muslim organizations. I would hope that rank-and-file Muslims will come forward. The main purpose of this hearing also is to protect the Muslim community. I will have Muslims testifying tomorrow showing how they're intimidated in their own communities, how Al-Qaeda is radicalizing, and when they go to their leaders in the community, the leaders tell them to keep quiet. The leaders attempt to obstruct investigations. They will talk about what's happened to the family. One man, his nephew was murdered in Somalia, and yet the local imams wanted to cover that up, and they harassed him when he went public with it. Another man, his son was a Muslim convert who was over in Yemen and came back and committed horrible crimes. He talks about the radicalization process. I want to protect the people in the Muslim community. I want to protect the broader American community as well, because we are one nation.
But one of those Muslims who will be testifying tomorrow is Congressman Keith Ellison, the first Muslim elected to Congress, and he is very concerned that this hearing is going to backfire, that it's going to play into the hands of terrorist recruiters who are going to use it to say, see, America is at war with Islam.
Well, they would only say that if they believe what radical Muslim leaders such as CARE are trying to say. Again, as an example of my good faith, back in December, this is almost 3 months ago, I invited Congressman Ellison. He and I disagree on this issue, but I invited him to testify at the hearing to give his side of it so he could say why he takes the positions he does. If I were trying to somehow ram a hearing through, I certainly wouldn't have invited Keith Ellison, who was the most prominent Muslim American in the Congress today, the first Muslim American ever elected. That, to me, shows the fairness on my side. So, again, I think if there is going to be any outgrowth from this, if there is going to be animosity, I would blame it on my opponents. I have conducted this from day one in a very orderly and professional way. The hysteria, the yelling in the rain in Times Square and all that was all generated by my opponents.
All right, Congressman Peter King, thank you very much.
Meredith, thank you.